Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is the first in a series of new webinar that we have in store for you that's all about coming back stronger, as we have now had the announcement that our hair salons can open and hopefully beauty and any massage and holistics will not be far behind. So kicking off today, we're going to be taking a closer look at the guidelines and what they mean to you about reopening. So if I could have the next slide, please. So today we've got my colleague, Marianne. So she's one of our account managers here at Treatwell. I'm sure a lot of you will have spoken to her before, and she's been really active on a lot of our webinars here over this time in lockdown. My name's Kate, and I'm one of the account managers here as well. And we are again lucky to have Madeline, who is our supply director for Northern Europe, to help answer some of the questions that we've had submitted and just to get some clarity on a few things that I know have been bothering some people. Next slide, please. So on today's agenda, as mentioned earlier, we're going to go through how to decipher the government guidelines in a little bit more detail. And that's not just for hair, but all of the businesses in our beauty industry. We're also going to give you some practical next steps that you can begin to implement and how that we may be able to help you with this at Treatwell. Then finally, we have a Q&A with some of the most popular submitted questions. We've also got the opportunity for you to ask some live ones as well. There's a link through a website called Slido, which is in the description box of this video. So you can click that and submit any live questions that come into your mind whilst watching. And we will get onto those at the end and try and answer as many as possible for you. Next slide, please. So first up, I'm going to hand over to Madeline just to share with you some thoughts from us here at Treatwell following this time.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I know that lots of you have got a busy kind of schedule over the next days preparing for reopen, or those of you who haven't had the announcement are obviously lots of things on your mind right now, lots of worries. So before we kind of got stuck into the content of today's webinar, we really just wanted to pause for a second and just kind of let you know our kind of feelings and our thoughts at this time. It's been an incredibly difficult time for all of this industry. So for hair and beauty and massage and wellness and spa. And I know that we've got a whole range of partners and people who aren't yet part of Treatwell, but a part of this fabulous industry on the webinar. And you're all in very different situations right now, but I think we can all kind of take a moment to really just kind of reflect on how challenging the last months have been. I think when we all got locked down over 100 days ago now, none of us imagined it was going to be for this long. And we've gone through different phases of really kind of just gearing up to reopen and feeling quite practical and quite energized, and then really having moments of being incredibly emotional and full of frustration, full of uncertainty and full of despair. And I actually just want to take a minute to acknowledge that, because although a lot of the people on this webinar today will be about to reopen and will be feeling incredibly excited about that, and I'm sure nervous about what the kind of new normal, much as I hate that expression, is going to be like, there are lots of people on this webinar who still haven't had a green light to reopen, and that's not just frustrating and not just difficult, but it's incredibly worrying. Like, this is livelihoods that we're talking about. And I really just want to say to you guys that we will do anything we can to support you. I know that we don't have all of the answers. We've tried incredibly hard to be as strong a voice as we can during this situation. We've been involved in a government task force, which has been working on the reopening guidelines. And we have been very, very clear in our dialogue all the way through this that we thought hair, beauty, massage and holistic should be treated as one. They're all close contact services. They all need customer confidence. They're all absolutely vital to our economy, and we wanted all of them to be treated the same. So we were incredibly disappointed that hasn't happened, and that we still don't have certainty around a reopening date for beauty and massage and holistic. And actually, even for our Welsh partners on the call, we don't even have certainty about an opening date full stop right now for any part of our segment. So it is disappointment. It is really disappointing. We're continuing to lobby exceptionally hard behind the scenes. There is more government meetings going on this week. There's one this afternoon. Our understanding right now is that obviously hair and barbering can open on the 4th. the government, the guidelines that were designed, that we and lots of other industry bodies have given input into, were done for all close contact treatments. So we think all of the content in them is still exceptionally relevant for everybody on this webinar. Our understanding is that the government wants to see them in practice, in operation for hairdressing and barbering, and understand whether any more refinements might need to be made for other close contact treatments. So I don't think they're irrelevant for everybody. I do still think they should form the core of everybody's thinking and preparations right now. So I won't kind of talk too much longer, because I think what everyone would really like to get onto is the more kind of useful and practical tips, and hopefully we can give you a bit of clarity and confidence to really interpret and understand these guidelines and make them applicable for your business. So I'll pass on to the ladies, but I really just wanted to take a moment to say that we absolutely understand the severity and the uncertainty and the worry of this situation, and we're here for you if you want to chat. If you need help, please speak to us. We'll do anything that we can. We wish we had more answers, but as it is, we'll move on to the stuff that we can try and give you a little bit more support on right now. So I'll pass back to Marianne. I think he's going to take the next section.
Thanks so much, Madeline. So if we could just pop onto the next slide. So before Kate a little bit later goes into more depth into what the government guidelines actually mean practically for your salon, I'm just going to run through with you some first steps that you need to start thinking about before you open your door. So if you could move on to the next slide. So I'm sure most of you listening today have looked through the close contact services guidelines that were released by the government last week. The purpose of this webinar is to give you a brief summary of what these guidelines mean and how you can kind of begin to translate them into specific actions within your salon. But to begin, before we go through this with you, I just kind of want to reiterate here that the needs of your business and what actions you need to take are going to naturally differ from another salon who might be down the road from you. So how you follow the government guidelines is going to entirely depend on the size and the type of the business that you are operating. So in order to help you decide which actions you're going to need to take, before you open your doors, you're going to need to carry out a COVID-19 risk assessment. So this risk assessment needs to be carried out just like you would for any other kind of health or safety hazard. It doesn't really require you to fill in huge amounts of paperwork or anything. Rather, it just kind of means you need to have a think about identifying what within your salon may pose as a COVID-19 risk and what kind of sensible measures you can put in place to control and prevent these risks. So, for example, you might walk around your salon and stock area and decide that allowing for deliveries of stock whilst you have customers in the salon wouldn't really be conducive to appropriate social distancing. You can also take other measures such as looking through your accident book and seeing what has previously caused incidents to happen within the salon. But kind of most importantly, you really need to involve your team and staff in this feedback process, because ultimately they are going to be in the best position to know what kind of services and treatments pose as a risk. So once you've endeavored to do this risk assessment, you need to share these results in your salon. So, for example, print them out as a poster or a notice to put on your front door, and you need to also publish them on your website, as this is really going to aid you in inspiring consumer confidence. On the slide here, as you can see, is an example given by the government of a notice that you can use to kind of prove that you've conducted a risk assessment on your premises. So moving on to the next slide. So before you open, there are 3 kind of touch points that we really want to encourage you to get on top of so that you're really able to maximize those first few days and weeks of reopening. So firstly, the first step you kind of need to take is tell your clients you're reopening. I'm going to run with you shortly. I'm shortly going to run through with you on how you can do this, but making use of Treatwell's new reopening campaign on Connect is a really good start. The second thing that you really need to do is make sure that you're comprehensively set up to take all forms of online bookings. In this new post-corona world, the way of the future really is going online. So you need to facilitate a functioning online booking system for your salon. And by doing this, you're not only going to free up precious time, but you're actually going to appeal to a growing customer demand for this type of appointment system. The third thing you're going to need to do, which I'm sure most of you are very much on top of already, is getting together your team, if you have one, and having a meeting to discuss all the kind of new internal changes that you'll be making within the salon. So moving on to the next slide. Treatwell has created a reopening back to business campaign within our marketing tab of Connect to help you reach as wide of an audience as your customers as you possibly can, so that you can inform them of your reopening. So not only will they receive an email or text with the option to book with you, but they'll also get a push notification if they have the Treatwell app downloaded. The campaign touches base with all of your clients who have an email address or phone number within Connect. So before you use the feature, it's really important that you make sure that your client list is uploaded and updated in the system so that you can really reap the full benefits out of the campaign. So moving on. So on top of using this handy campaign, I really encourage all of you to also take advantage of all our social media and in-salon printable assets. Treatwell has sent these out in a communications email with all of our partners, but they include really fun and exciting social media posters that you can use to, get the momentum building and let your customers know that you're open and you're ready to take bookings. We also have things like practical posters and assets that you can either post on social media or print and hang up in your salon, just to remind your customers of any kind of necessary hygiene practices that you encourage them to follow. So social media engagement is kind of, during this time, more important now than ever. And not just because lockdown has forced us to turn to it as a way of communicating with your customers, but trends from our other markets have also showed that new and repeat customers are going to use your social media as an informative platform where they can obtain new information on what hygiene practices you're going to be following. So just be sure that you're showcasing any new measures or any active changes via all of your social media channels. I also just want to note here that you should probably also consider the particular needs of people who might have protected characteristics, such as those who have hearing or visually impaired problems. So perhaps think of ways around this, like sending pre-recorded voice notes just to get your message across. So moving on to the next slide. So managing your client flow post-corona is probably going to look a little bit different to what you did before you shut your salon. So firstly, as I spoke with you just then, it's really imperative that you're actively engaging with your clients about any new policy changes you're making to your salon. So communication here is key. If you really want to be able to utilize any of the marketing features we have available in Connect, get on top of having your client list uploaded. You also need to think about preparing some kind of email with your new guidelines to send out to customers after they book with you. Secondly, the government has recommended and advised that you make yourself bookable by appointment only. What this means is that if you can prevent it, you shouldn't really be accommodating for walk-ins. So one thing to do is, have you checked that you have a widget or book now button installed on your website, your Facebook and your Instagram? If you haven't, please get in touch with your account manager and we can arrange this for you as soon as possible. Another thing you can do is send out the client app referral download through Connect, which places you on the homepage of Treatwell's app every time a customer opens it. I also just want to note here quickly, you need to communicate with your customers that you're going to be taking appointments only online, and you can do that through social as well. So the third part of managing your client flow that has changed is that with the new guidelines, your salon needs to keep a temporary record of all client visits for 21 days to support the new NHS trace and test system. So if you're still using a pen and paper system to record all of your appointments, now is the time to switch. Having all of your bookings recorded digitally is really imperative here. So if you haven't already done so, you should be adding all of your appointments in, including your direct appointments, into Connect. And if you're including their client details in this process, Connect will automatically put that individual onto your client list for you too. So Connect is a really secure place to store client data, but it also allows for you to make sure that all the information that you're storing is GDPR compliant. Moving on. So on this slide are some suggestions of guidelines and policies you can communicate to your clients before they're coming into an appointment, so that you can make sure that you're all on the same page once they do arrive. Coming back to the point that I made a little bit earlier on, these guidelines are going to be a product of your COVID-19 risk assessment. And the protocols that you choose to adopt are actually naturally going to differ from the salon who might be next to you. So they really depend on a whole range of factors, as that could include whether you're self-employed, how much capacity you have, what services you offer, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll just run through with you with these points quickly. So firstly, you could remind them to wash or sanitize their hands before entering the premises. You could ask them to attend on their own where preferable. If they are going to bring children or they have to, just reinforce that they are responsible for supervising and making sure that everyone's social distance. You could also reiterate any essential COVID-19 symptom screening questions. So these could include, have you had a cough or high temperature? And depending on their response, if your client has had any of these symptoms, you should tell them that they should stay at home and reschedule their appointment. You could also encourage clients to arrive at the time of their scheduled appointment. So, for example, here, the rule could be that if they arrive early, they won't be able to wait inside because your waiting area doesn't accommodate for social distancing. Or you could say if they're more than 15 minutes late, for the obvious reasons you won't be able to accommodate for their appointment. And the last point here is you could provide information on where the client should wait and enter the premises. I'm also just going to note here that you can use the tools that we offer on Connect to reach out to your clients and email them with any of the above details. So moving on. So just as a FYI, on our side at Treatwell, we are really doing our part in helping you keep your customers aware of the responsibility and the role that your customers play in keeping your workspace safe. So on this slide, as you can see here, there are some screenshots of measures and warnings we're posting at our webpage to inform clients of all the new best practices. And Treatwell are also using any kind of interaction we have with our customers to reiterate all of these points. So we're providing them with updates and all of our transactional emails and any of the pre-booking confirmation emails we send out. We have a dedicated hygiene and safety landing page available to them if they want to find out any extra information. So moving on to the next slide. So another element of your business you should probably be reconsidering is revising your menu. So for those of you who aren't aware, we do have a cleanup time available for all your services in Connect. So to access or edit this time period, just click on the service in your menu and you can change the time to whatever you please, depending on how messy the service may be. So the calendar is automatically going to reflect this and not take any bookings during that time. You could also consider creating some new express services on your menu or even packages, which may allow customers to kill two birds with one stone and ultimately minimize the amount of contact or time they have to spend with you in the salon. Also, for extended treatments such as braiding or hair coloring, it's worth thinking about how you can minimize the length of an appointment. Because in the government guidelines, there are really no hard and fast rules on this, but they have recommended that you review the duration of any extended treatment. So I know the reality is that it can be really hard to cut down on treatments of this type, but there are little ways that you can make a difference. So for example, think about ways in which you can potentially speed up the start of an appointment by either potentially doing an online or phone consultation instead of in person. Also, if you are encouraging your customers to prepay when booking, this is naturally going to speed up the time at the end of appointment. I note here also that some of you might be wondering about whether you can or should be seeing other clients during the processing time of a hair coloring appointment. And to be honest, this is kind of a question that needs to be assessed depending on the size of your workspace. But you could think about moving your client to a socially distanced, safe area whilst you saw someone in the same chair. However, every movement of a client needs to be treated like a new customer. So if you were to do that, you would need to do a full clean down and disinfect the surface of the space, not only once, but twice. But ultimately, you also want to give your client the best possible experience they can have in your salon as possible. So potentially moving them to a new area with no magazines and no distractions to entertain them might not be something you want to do. But this is all the kind of stuff that you need to start thinking about before you open your doors. So moving on to the next slide. Preparing your team. So preparing your team for all the changes you're going to make is one of, if not the most important step in your plan for reopening. Your plans need to be clear, but you also have to be ready to adapt, as you don't know what's going to change or what's going to happen in the future. So some of the things you can do are, 1, consider splitting your workers into teams or shift groups, potentially who start at different times to avoid spreading contact. It might even be a good idea to get your team in with their shift buddies for a trial run of what the social distancing will look like and practicing the one-way in systems, etc., to get them as comfortable as possible for reopening. You should also be modifying your rota and opening hours on Connect to reflect this. There's also another thing you can do. Maybe consider providing additional parking or facilities, for example, bike racks for your staff or employees so that they don't necessarily feel obliged to get public transport to work. But you should also be creating a defined process of social distancing during your shift handovers. So make sure you're keeping a detailed document for your staff's reference explaining how treatments are going to be handled and what arrangements have been made with specific clients beforehand. Obviously, you need to train your team with these new procedures and consistently ask for their feedback once you've reopened. And for those of you who are sole traders, I think it's a really good idea to start collaborating with other businesses who might share their premises with you to make sure you're minimizing the amount of people on site. So I'm just going to move on to Kate now, who's going to go a little bit more in depth as to what the government guidelines mean inside your salon.
Great, thank you, Marianne. If we could have the next slide, please. So as we mentioned earlier, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just helping to interpret some of the guidelines that have been published. As normal, they are a little bit confusing, a little bit convoluted, a lot of words, and a lot of grey areas where people aren't quite sure what is and isn't acceptable. As Madeline mentioned, these are for all close contact services, so not just for hair necessarily. Obviously, some of these will be specific to hair, but we want you, anyone that's in a beauty business or a massage and holistic, to also consider, okay, how would that look like in my business and what can I do to start preparing now and thinking about the area that I work in. So starting with the waiting area. It's quite specific in terms of what refreshments you are able to have in salon. So only water in disposable cups or a bottle is the only form of food or drinks allowed. I know that we've had some partners, and I've heard some things where people are planning reopening parties or, Prosecco, tea, coffee, all of that. Unfortunately, those will have to wait. It is water only. This is the only form of refreshment that is available. You should also consider whether your waiting area can maintain social distancing of 2 meters. Again, this is going back to your risk assessment. If it can't maintain that social distancing, have you thought about implementing a queuing system? What does that look like? How would you mark it out? Do you have room outside of your salon to implement anything like that? Or would you need a 1-in, 1-out policy based on your appointment bookings? The third one is to create an environment that is as contactless as possible. Contactless being the key word. That's not just necessarily with payments, but absolutely anything that a client can pick up and have unnecessary contact with, it's best to get rid of. So anything like magazines, flyers, unfortunately, it's best to keep them out of the way and leave the salon door open to minimize as much touching as possible. Any hygiene practices, any additional training that you've done during lockdown, print them out and visibly display them in your salon. This will give so much consumer confidence to know that you've gone out of your way to make sure that you're following all of the guidelines in place. Where practical, any screens and barriers between clients are advised, and that also goes in to the next point where 2 meters social distancing is a guideline and 1 meter is only acceptable when there are additional precautions in place. So it's not that 1 meter is the new guideline, 2 meters is still the guideline, but obviously there will be some instances where that's just not possible, such as in the washing basin, and that is where we would always consider using some kind of screen or barrier. If I could have the next slide, please. So moving on to any kind of hair or any treatment prep at all. So the face visor is the required PPE following government guidelines. I know that we've done previous webinars on recommended hygiene and what we've seen from our colleagues in Europe, where their PPE have been things like face masks, face coverings. But a face visor is the required PPE of the government guidelines. You will not be able to reopen unless you are following this advice and using a face visor to practice. Patch testing has also been something that's come up. You are not allowed to invite customers in to have a patch test prior to reopening. This has to be done from the 4th only, or from the reopening date for any other service only. It's frustrating. I totally appreciate that, because you'll want to maximize the appointments that you have, but clients should not be coming in to get their patch test done prior to reopening. Clients are also not required to wash their hair beforehand. There has been some rumours that clients should turn up with wet hair to prevent them having to go to the basin or have you wash their hair or anything like that. That's absolutely fine for them to come with dry hair, and also for you to perform a dry cut. That's also something that has been confirmed is absolutely fine to do. It's also not compulsory for your clients to attend their appointment with any form of PPE. So that means you don't have to have them wear a face mask or a face covering being the preferred method of people outside of our key frontline workers. But it's not required for people. As long as you're taking all of the necessary precautions, there should be no reason for your clients to. However, if you feel within yourself and your team that you would rather clients come with their own form of protective face covering, you can stipulate this in your own salon guidelines. But also be warned that people may not adhere to it, as it isn't something that is being mandatorily enforced. As mentioned before, where practical, install any screens or barriers between clients where washing or where social distancing cannot be adhered to. And ensure all of your stations are positioned adhering to social distancing guidelines. As Marianne mentioned earlier, with hair colouring, it's going to be a little bit of a new way of working, but make sure you have a secure, isolated area for a client to wait in if they are being moved for development time. And do keep in mind that every time you move that client and a new one sits down, every client is treated as a new one. It will be a complete disinfect of every single area every time you move them. So really consider whether that is the most practical option for you. Next slide, please. So in your work chair or workstation, as it stands for hair treatments, only hair on the head can be treated. That is the guideline that was given, which I will agree is very confusing. It means no shaving, but yes to beard trims. We know that facial hair is hair on the head, but this is how it's been interpreted. So you cannot do any kind of hot towel shaving, but you are able to trim those beards, which is good news, I'm sure, to a lot of men out there that are getting rather bushy around the chin. There are no restrictions on hairdryer usage. Again, this has been a rumour that's been flying around whether blow dries will be allowed. As far as it's been confirmed, there are no restrictions there on any hairdryer usage or the number of hairdryers being used at the time. So all blow dry services can carry on as normal. Another query on that has also been to do with air conditioning units, another unit that blows out air. Again, there's no restrictions on any kind of air conditioning. So all kinds of air conditioning and blow dries can carry on as normal and as before. So where possible, it's advised for your staff to work side to side or back to back rather than facing each other. So again, look at your workspaces and consider how that will work for you. And as a lot of us do anyway, one worker per workstation. So it's really common practice in our industry for everyone to have their workstation that they like to stick to, but it's really important that this is continued in this way and that one worker is really responsible for their area and keeping it clean, disinfected, and making sure that they are following all of the cleaning guidelines for every single client that comes in. Next slide, please. So taking payment has been a really big hot topic. You'll need to minimize any contact around transaction here. So this means that where possible, always encourage people to be paying by contactless card and minimize cash handling. You can also have the option of them prepaying if you are a Treatwell partner. We do think a lot of customers will actually prefer this method of payment as it will just minimize any contact and also the time spent in the salon following the treatment. So you can get them to prepay prior to them coming in and then they just get up and leave following the treatment ending. A point of sale software integrated with a card treatment provider will make for a very quick and seamless checkout of appointments. Treatwell Connect has got integrated point of sale functionality if this is the software you are already using. Please do get in touch if you'd like to find out how to utilize this if you are a Treatwell Connect user. Equally, if you're a partner but not using Connect to its full functionality, this is really going to help you here. We do have another webinar as part of our previous series, which is all about point of sale and contactless payments. So we can link you to that in a follow-up email to make sure that you have all of the information there. And do get in touch with one of us in the account management team if you would like any more information on point of sale, where to find it, where to activate it, and we'll be more than happy to help. Just to mention as well, cash handling is not something that's been prohibited. You can still accept cash, you can still accept all forms of payment, but it is very strongly discouraged. As we've all been used to by doing our general shopping and shopping in supermarkets, everywhere is shouting about contactless payment and minimizing those cash payments. So contactless is the recommended payment method across the board for all businesses. If you didn't accept card or contactless prior to lockdown, I would consider upgrading your system to allow all methods of payment going forward. This is mostly to instill customer confidence and not alienate a customer base. A lot of people will certainly feel more used to and more comfortable paying via card or contactless going forward. And by not giving the option, you're then disallowing those people to come and visit you in your salon. So do consider taking more methods of payment in salon if you're not doing it already. Next slide, please. Here's just some examples as well of our Back to Salon toolkit. So all Treatwell partners will be sent these kinds of assets, a reopening guide, some social media images, some printable posters that you can use inside the salon to whichever way you need to in order to help with the process of reopening. This is all available to you and should have been emailed to you already as part of our Back to Salon campaign. Next slide, please. You'll see here a few examples of how our partners are already using it. So we have some of the posters being used, some social media images, just to help guide you into what to communicate with your customers going forward. Next slide, please. So finally, we'll move on to the Q&A. So we have some pre-prepared questions here, which has come from the sign-up form. So we will have asked you if you had any questions then. So we've taken the most popular ones and we can get them answered here. Following this, we'll go on to the Slido link. So again, that's a link that's in the description box of the YouTube page here. And you should be able to click on that and submit any questions that you have that have come into your head during the presentation, during this part. We'll try and get them answered for you live on the webinar. So first question. Can we still blow dry? As I mentioned earlier, yes, absolutely. Blow drying is still acceptable. As many blow dries as you can fit in whilst adhering to social distancing, as many hair dryers going as you can as well. It's still completely fine to carry out that service. And the next one. How should massage venues prepare for reopening? I know this has been quite a hot topic and I'm going to pass over to Madeline to help us answer that one.
Yeah, I'm really happy to take this one, and I'm actually really happy that someone's speaking up on behalf of massage venues, because if I kind of put myself in your shoes, I completely understand that you're feeling a little bit probably at sea in a lot of these guidelines and a lot of the updates that have been coming through lately, because there hasn't been a lot of very specific references to massages and facials and brow treatments and things like that. And I know from the very early kind of lockdown days, massage is one of the first treatments to get called out by name, albeit massage parlours, which none of us really use that terminology anymore. But it was one of the first treatments to actually get put into lockdown. And I'm pretty sure that you're feeling a little bit kind of lost and uncertain right now. So thank you to whoever asked that question. So I think the kind of important thing to say about massages is that the guidelines, as we kind of said a little bit earlier on, but the guidelines that have been circulated are for close contact services. They've already had a lot of input from us, from Urban, who deal with the mobile segment of the industry, from the National Hairdressers and Beauty Federation, from the British Beauty Council. We've given a lot of input, and we've given that covering all treatment types, not just for hair and barbering. The government has chosen to reopen hair and barbering. Disappointing for all of us, but it's our understanding that they're taking a little bit more time to see these guidelines in practice and understand whether they're sufficient for other treatment types. So the meeting that's happening this afternoon, we believe, and we're not completely certain, but we believe it's specifically to review these guidelines again in reference to other treatment types that aren't yet open. So there could be some revisions. People could decide that we need to kind of make something a little bit different, but we would say the best thing that you can do right now in terms of preparing to reopen is to do that COVID risk assessment. So the guidelines say that it's mandatory for the bigger kind of teams, so 5+ people, but we really think it's advisable to everybody. And as Marianne said earlier on, what that risk assessment will let you do is to really understand which parts of those guidelines are really going to work for your business and where you can adhere to them. So there are things that we've covered in this webinar that are in the guidelines that you absolutely can follow. So things like appointment booking, thinking about your waiting space, your arrival process, whether you're encouraging your clients to pay by card. But there is just no getting away from the fact that a massage is going to take place behind closed doors and that distance can't be maintained. So that said, a proportion of the treatment is going to happen with your client face down, so contact in that breathing zone, which is what everybody's really worried about, is limited. And we believe that's really key, and that's the advice that we're giving on this task force. We know that the industry bodies are working with government the way that we are to make sure that that is really properly understood, along with the fact that treatments like massage have got a hugely positive effect, not just on our economy, but on people's physical and mental health. So we really don't want the government or anybody else to have this perception that beauty is any less valuable than hair. It absolutely isn't, and we don't want it just to become a catch-all that people think isn't priority. So that is, I think, the most constructive thing that we can use our time doing right now. And we're really trying to push for the benefits of that physical interaction and physical touch. So all of us have to wait for the government to give massage the green light and to clarify whether visors are still the correct and the sufficient PPE or whether anything else should be considered. But we genuinely do believe that you can safely give a massage by focusing most on the hygiene part of the guidelines. So you guys already know exactly what you're doing in terms of hygiene and elevated safety. So that, for me, is the single best thing you could be focusing on. And that is the advice that we're giving to government. So long answer to that question, but my main summary there is to do your risk assessment, think about the things that you can be seen to really kind of adhering to and making changes to. And we will continue with other industry bodies campaigning incredibly hard behind the scenes on the physical, the mental, the economic value of services like massages. And it goes without saying that as soon as we have any news, you will absolutely be the first people to hear it. So hang on in there. It's a really difficult time, but hopefully we're going to get that green light sometime very soon.
Great. Thank you, Madeline. Next question, please. Do clients need to wear masks? I think I mentioned that one slightly earlier, that it's not included in the guidelines. So it's mandatory for you guys as the professionals to wear the face visors, but it's not mandatory for your clients to wear any kind of face covering. In terms of masks, I think the government have been quite clear to keep and reserve any formal form of PPE masks for our key frontline workers in the NHS. So it's face coverings that are recommended for any kind of, anywhere where they are mandatory, such as on public transport. But for this instance, it's not.
I would just add to that one, Kate, as well. I think if you're kind of thinking in your kind of business about whether you would feel a lot more comfortable if your clients were wearing masks, if that's practical for the kind of treatment that they would be having. So obviously for something like hair, most of the time a client could wear a mask, and you might just need them to ask them to remove the bits behind the ear for certain parts of the treatment. So if it's something that's going to make you feel more comfortable, then I think it's completely acceptable to ask that your clients do wear them. But as I think the lady said earlier on, you would need to communicate that to a client beforehand, so making sure that you've updated your good to know or your restrictions on Treatwell, possibly use your social media or the email function within Connect to let clients know. There is a possibility that somebody will still turn up without a mask. So I think you and your team, if you have one, just need to think through what your process would be. Do you want to turn the client away if they turn up without a mask, or do you want to have a stock of a mask that's available to them? And if you do want to have a stock, do you want to ask them for a voluntary contribution to the cost of that? Do you want to make sure you charge them for it? I think the key with anything is really just the communication. Decide what your policy is, make sure you've communicated it. And if you have communicated it, then you can enforce it. But if you haven't told a client what your expectation is, it isn't a legal requirement for them to wear one right now. So you just need to make sure that they're fully kind of up to speed with what will make you most comfortable. And I think it's incredibly important that you let them know that that's the reason you're doing it as well. We've seen lots of salons and clinics and holistic therapists opening up all around Europe right now. And honestly, from talking to them, clients really want to look after you as well. This isn't kind of a difficult relationship where people are trying to do the wrong things. They want to keep you safe as much as you want to keep them safe and your team safe. So it really is just about communication.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Next
well
question,
Madeline.
What do we need to print and display? Sorry, Marianne.
That's okay.
Carry on.
So I spoke about this before, but what you should definitely be displaying prominently in your salon is the government's COVID-19 secure risk assessment poster. This is the one that I showed you a little bit earlier on in the presentation. You should also probably be publishing it on your website, as it is in line with the new regulations. But on top of that as well, Treatwell really recommends displaying some of the hygiene posters that we've made for you throughout the salon. For example, reminders to customers to wash their hands, reminders for them to be potentially wearing a mask if that is your policy, reminders to leave the door open, reminders to avoid touching surfaces, etc. But at the end of the day, really, you probably should be erring on the side of caution, as ultimately this is going to inspire consumer confidence, and it's going to make your customers feel secure and safe when they're walking into your premises, like knowing that you're looking out for them. So yeah, just as many reminder hygiene posters as you can, really, I think, for this one. Next question. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Marianne, I've got eyes on Slido as well, and somebody has asked a great question, which I'm sure lots of people have been thinking through this webinar as well, is in terms of the posters. We've obviously got lots of sole traders on here as well. So this example is from in a home treatment room. Is there any way the printable assets could reflect those of you who are I and not we? Yes, absolutely. So we have already prepared both the principal posters and the social assets to make sure that there are versions for I as well as we. We will make sure that they're circulated after this call for all of our Treatwell partners. But thank you for pulling us up on that. We should have said that there are both options available as well.
Thanks so much for clarifying, Madeline. So if we want to go back to the questions. So the next question is it true clients' treatment time is limited or restricted? So I spoke about this before as well, but no, there are no hard and fast rules on this. However, the government has recommended that you really review the duration of any extended treatments that you may have, and consider minimizing the length of the appointment, just to minimize contact all in all. So as I spoke about before, there are lots of things you can do to minimize the time of your appointment. So rethinking your consultations, encouraging customers to prepay, making sure that you have all your materials and tools kind of prepared for when the appointment starts, just doing little things like that to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of time spent fluffing around during your appointment. Next question. So this is a really valid question. Are my clients allowed to use the salon bathroom? So the simple answer is yes, they are, but there are a couple of steps that you're going to need to go over before you open up your bathroom to your clients. So doing things like using signs and posters to build awareness of good hand washing techniques, reminding your customers to wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. You should also consider the use of social distancing marking in areas where queues normally form. So, for example, placing tape on the floor, and potentially even creating a kind of limited entry approach. So 1 in, 1 out. Or something like that. You should also kind of consider making hand sanitizer available on the entry into the bathrooms, where you can place it where it's safe and practical, but also kind of setting clear use and cleaning guidance for the toilets with increased frequency of cleaning. So if you're putting up a visible cleaning schedule within the bathroom that's going to reaffirm to your customers that yes, the bathroom has been cleaned, and you're going about that in a way that's looking out after them. You should also consider the use of disposable cloths or paper roll to clean all hard surfaces. And I know that there may be a question on this in the future, but some of you might be asking, is there a certain way that you have to dispose of contaminated items? The answer is no. You would just need to dispose of it in your normal kind of waste, but make sure you're doing it carefully. And also, to avoid contamination, make sure you're providing more waste facilities within the salon and within your bathroom, and encouraging more frequent rubbish collection and removal. So beforehand, if maybe you were only emptying the bin once a day, you should be doing it 2 or 3 times a day from now on. Next question. Kate.
So what PPE equipment is needed? So I think we've mentioned a couple of times about the recommended PPE equipment from the government, which is just the face visor. To Madeline's earlier point, I think it's going to be a lot based on conversation that you have with your team and what result you get from your risk assessment as to what you and your team will feel most comfortable with. But to clear up a couple of things like gloves are absolutely not mandatory. Obviously, there will be some treatments where you guys are naturally wearing gloves anyway, so continue to do so in treatments like that. But anywhere where you wouldn't normally wear gloves, you don't now necessarily have to wear them. There's also been some questions about towels, gowns, whether they need to be disposable or not. Again, this is not something that has to be disposable. You can use reusable towels and reusable gowns as long as you are washing them after every single client at the highest temperature recommended, to make sure that they are completely disinfected. But in terms of PPE, as we mentioned, just the face visor, and then whatever is going to make returning to work a more comfortable experience for you and your team, as well as your clients. And then next question, please. So one for Madeline. In other European countries, how have the markets fared?
Good question, and lots of very kind of different answers to that, because it's very different, obviously, by geography and by treatment type. We're in 13 different countries across Europe, and we've had staggered reopening dates for all of those different markets. We've also had some markets where they opened hair and beauty and holistic services all at once, and we've had others where it's been a different kind of a varied opening date. So the stats are very different, and they're obviously very influenced by that kind of thing as well. The really positive thing is that you guys are going to be busy when you open, and those of you who I think already know you're opening on the 4th will be thinking exactly the same. You're probably booked back to back for your first couple of weeks, possibly first 3 weeks back, as obviously there's been a huge amount of pent-up demand for hair colouring, haircuts, like men's treatments have been absolutely off the scale. Men's treatments actually have had a really, really big spike, and I think that's because men are a really natural adopter. This is a massive gender stereotype, I'm very aware as I'm saying it, but a really kind of quick adopter of technology. And I'll be really honest, that I think a lot of men didn't realise that Treatwell was for them previously, because a lot of our kind of imagery and marketing was a lot more female. But I think during the lockdown, that's definitely changed. And because of that, we've had a real rush of people booking barbering services. But you can pretty much predict the treatments that have come back quick. It's those real maintenance treatments, the cut and the colouring. The one thing definitely to be aware of is that obviously because people have not had their hair done for quite a while, the services that they need might be a little bit different. So people who thought that they were just getting a trim might need a full restyle. People who thought they might just have been getting their roots done actually need something a bit more intensive. So that's kind of definitely one to be aware of. The 2 treatments that we've been a little bit more worried about, and that we've seen them come back slower, to be completely transparent with you, have been facials and massages. And I think that really is down to the consumer confidence. It's not that people don't want to have these treatments. I think people absolutely understand they're not even treatments they can DIY very well at home. They're ones that they absolutely trust the professional for, but they're a little bit slower, either for financial reasons, because people we have to be honest and say that people have lost their jobs due to this pandemic. They may have more kind of financial restrictions on what they can book and when. But I do think that the primary kind of reticence from customers is that confidence piece. And we've taken all of that on board. We've seen it in the data. We're very aware of it. We're very worried about the fact that beauty has been delayed by the government reopening in the UK and the impact that could have. And it's forming most of our thinking and our work right now. So all of the effort and the marketing budget and everything we've got will be about rebuilding customer confidence in treatments like that. We're not worried about hair. We're not worried about nails. We know that it's coming back. There are a few services like waxing that are coming back, but it's not this instant surge the way that hair is, because people have been doing some kind of home-based treatment. So to put it very kind of like, obviously people are in different shaving cycles, different hair growth cycles. Therefore, you don't necessarily expect that everyone needs to be booked back in that first week. So that's more of a gradual. We do also know that a lot more beauty treatments than hair treatments are actually linked to travel. So with uncertainty around the travel industry getting going again, that's also got an influence. That's also forming part of our discussions on this government task force, that we're trying to really make sure there is total clarity around the dependencies of other industries and how so interlinked these things are. But we do think that the fact that pubs and restaurants are reopening and people's social lives are getting up and going has got a really positive impact, because people do want to look great when they're going to go out in public and meet their friends again. So a pretty long answer to the question, but I would say that the data is good. There are things that absolutely we've got eyes on that I think will be quite common sense to lots of people, and we're redeploying our time and our efforts to match where we see anything that's more of a concern. For hair, what you will definitely find is that it's your regulars rushing to get back in. But once that immediate surge of your regulars coming through has kind of died down a little bit, you will start to have more availability. That's where obviously we will start to kick in. As soon as we get reopening dates for different treatments, we switch back on our marketing. So obviously we've paused all of that during lockdown, when people couldn't go into salons or clinics or centres or to home-based salons. Now that we know hair and barbering is reopen, all of our ads are back on. The thing that you can do to help us make sure that we are specifically getting you back up and running is to click on the banner that's in Connect that tells us you are reopening. So we will kind of assume that you guys are reopening in terms of the transactional emails that we need to send to customers, but giving us the green light that you are reopening as soon as you know you've got a date and you can reopen gives us the confidence to switch back on all of our marketing that's specific to your venue or your salon. So definitely do that, the Treatwell partners, and make sure that you've got the full might of Treatwell behind you. But you know, it's going to be a difficult time. The sooner we can get beauty open, the better, because we want people to kind of get out there and enjoy the sunshine with their pedicure and with their freshly waxed legs and their great lashes, because they're going to get in and out of might be a swimming pool, might be a paddling pool, who knows whether we're all allowed to travel or not. But there are so many interdependencies. Again, all I can say to you is that we are pushing as hard as we can. And from a Treatwell perspective, we will put all of our efforts into that rebuilding consumer confidence piece. And I know that lots of other people are very conscious of it and will be doing exactly the same. So we've got you on this one. We will do everything we can to get customers booking back in with you.
Perfect. So if we move over to the Slido and just see whether there are any questions that have come in that we will be able to look at. So again, probably another one for Madeline, which you probably covered a little bit through the previous questions. After today's task force meeting, when will we get an update regarding the outcome? Or most importantly, if we have a date for beauty and holistic?
Yeah, this is the answer, the question that we all want answered. And unfortunately, I haven't got an answer on this one. So at no point in our discussions have we been given any timelines. Even when we got shown the guidelines and we were asked to give input on them, we were given a deadline as to when we could give that input by, but at no stage have we been given firm dates for when any more announcements are going to come. I know I keep saying the same thing, but I think the best thing I can say is that the meeting this afternoon, our understanding that it is a meeting that is with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, so BEIS. They're the guys who produce these guidelines and who are really kind of instrumental in determining when these reopening dates will be and what guidelines support them. So that's for us giving all of the information that we've given about the value of beauty to the economy, the amount of people who are employed, the impact this is having on people's livelihoods, but also really going down the line of the physical and mental well-being of people in the UK and the role that beauty and holistic has to play in that. So I'm really sorry I can't give you a definite date. I think and I hope that it's not too far away, but I don't have a date, and it would be wrong of me to speculate.
Thank you, Madeline. The next one, are guidelines just a guide? We decide whether to follow them or not. Feel free to interject where. I would say
another
it's
good
hard.
question. I think the reality is that in namesake, yes, guidelines are just that. They are a guide. There are a few things in there that are stipulated. So the visors for reopening is stipulated. The majority of everything else that's in there is a recommendation. And as we said at the start of it, I think that the most important thing to do is to go through that risk assessment for your business, for your workspace, and understand where it's really practical and sensible for you to follow those guidelines and where you simply can't. So my example before of you can't keep 1 or 2 meters distance if you're giving a facial or you're giving a massage. You just can't do that. But there are other parts of those guidelines that you absolutely can follow. The thing that I would say is that yes, whilst they're recommendations and while they're a guide, I don't think that means that any of us, and I don't suggest for a second you are, but I don't think any of us should disregard them because that they're not legal requirements in every instance. Because the reality is that if something did go wrong and a local authority or a health and safety body did come into your salon or your workspace and there was an issue that they wanted to investigate, they will absolutely refer back to these guidelines to see whether you are doing your best to follow them. So it's absolutely fine if every part of them can't be followed and you've got a really good reason why, and that's practical for the treatments that you provide or the space that you're in. But you absolutely should be following as much of these guidelines as you can and interpreting them and making them work for your business.
And just to add to what Madeline said, that a failure to kind of complete a risk assessment, which is what we spoke about earlier in the webinar, which takes account of any kind of COVID-19 risks within your salon, could actually result in a breach of health and safety law, and the HSC or any local authority can actually come to your salon and make sure that you comply with any of the relevant public health legislation and guidance. So yeah, just following on that point from Madeline, yes, it is a guide, but it can constitute a breach of law, and you do have an obligation to follow the guidelines in the best way that you can based on the risk assessment that you've made within your salon.
Perfect. And then finally, if there aren't any news on a COVID-19 consultation form in connection with Treatwell?
I'm going to take this one as well. Another question, and I know that one person's asked this question, but there are hundreds of you who are waiting for the answer on this one. News, yes. A definite availability date, no. So what the situation is with consultation forms at the moment. So first to say, consultations are something that we have been asked for a lot, and we've been thinking about and trying to kind of figure out what is the right kind of consultation form. Lots of you have given us really great input. So we shared in our Facebook community group Behind Closed Doors, we shared a survey that hundreds of you have replied to and given us really in-depth information about how you would want to use that in your business, which is fantastic. Our product team are currently working on all of that input to figure out the best way for us to build this. It sounds like such a simple thing to build. I completely know that, but with everything, we have to kind of go through this prioritization process of how many partners need it, how quickly do we need it, how do we make it really useful for the majority of people. And the competing priority that we've had is obviously the fact that we've had hair, beauty and holistic businesses waiting and wanting to reopen. And we figured that the biggest priority and the most important thing for us to do was to work on that reopening campaign to make sure that you guys had the support to connect with your clients, tell them that you're going to be open again, and to make sure you get those bookings through. So we really kind of went down the booking priority and helping you guys to actually get money flowing through those tills again. That's why this wasn't the first and kind of only thing that we built during lockdown, but it is now underway. The other kind of thing to say about this is that, as well as a consultation form, which is kind of really good best practice, and you guys use it on an everyday basis for lots of treatments, there is now a different potential thing that you might want, which is more of a consent form, more of a waiver form, which would require a signature. So what we're trying to do is understand whether we build one thing or whether we build two different things, whether it needs to have a signature capture or whether it can be something that's just kind of tick boxes and you're just building up that fact finder on your client. In lieu of us having that ready immediately, and what we're trying to build is something that's properly integrated into our solution, so that when you tell us what treatments would need a consultation form, and when anybody books one, whether that's direct through you and you put the appointment in Connect, or whether it's through your Book Now widget on social or your own website, or whether it's through Treatwell, we would fire off those consultations or waiver forms in advance and capture the information you guys need. That requires a little bit more work. So the here and now solution for anybody wanting to use something straight away is to use a standalone system, whether that's Google Forms. There's a system out there called Jotform that I know a lot of our partners have been recommending, and I think you can do up to 100 free in a month without having to pay. It is a paid for service after that. But there are lots of free and there are lots of simple solutions out there that you can use. It isn't totally connected to your Treatwell bookings or your appointments, but what you can do, as soon as you've got that back from a client, you can go into their client record in Treatwell and you can add a link to their completed form and put that on their client record. So you are kind of manually connecting those two things and making sure you've got the information in one place. So Google Forms, Jotform, quick search, there are kind of other solutions out there. What we're going to try and do is kind of work with one of those partners to make that a little bit more seamless whilst we work on a more integrated solution. So again, I'm sorry, my answers are incredibly long today, but just trying to use this opportunity to give you as much information and also explain when I'm having to say not yet, sorry, you've kind of got a bit more context on why. But hopefully that helps, and that's an interim solution that you now know you can at least store the links to those forms on the client record in Treatwell.
Perfect. Yes, I know in terms of some of the solutions that you mentioned, Madeline, that we are definitely working. I know that I'm part of a task force team that's testing with a few of our partners. A few of our commercial account managers are working on whether they are a suitable interim solution. So it's definitely top of our agenda to help to get something workable for you in the time being. So yes, if there are no other questions, obviously the Slido will still be open. So if you think of any burning questions that you want to ask us following this, feel free to still submit them. The Slido will be there and we will still be able to access them and answer them for you at a later date, either via a follow-up email or getting in touch with you. Alternatively, you can just get in touch with us with any questions that you have following this. But thank you all again for joining. As our previous slide said, this is part of a series of upcoming webinars. So we've got the next one that is coming up soon. The next one we're hoping to do will be hearing from our partners who will have reopened already. So we're hoping to give a little bit of insight to those that have reopened, share any tips they can have on being back in business, and sharing some of the early booking trends from the first couple of weeks since the reopening date. So stay tuned for the next date and time. We'll be in touch. It will hit your emails, and hopefully we will see you all again soon. But take care and best of luck to those reopening at the weekend.